Okay. All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started if that's okay with everybody. I think what we wanted to do today is kind of regroup on the air filtration measure based on some of the recent discussions. So the goal of this meeting would be kind of figure out kind of where we are and some next steps on the program, and kind of what we might be able to expect. So I really kind of wanted to start by maybe kind of taking a step back and just reframing what we wanted to do with the school air filtration measure, so that we're all kind of operating on the same kind of understanding. Ultimately, the goal of this particular measure was to improve air filtration within schools within the community by a couple of methods. One, by either replacing filters that are within the school to something that's better than what they have already, or two, deploying standalone units that might work, for adding some additional filtration within a school classroom. And those program options were developed by CARB and implemented within the 617 guidelines. They could potentially pay for the full cost of filters, for assessments, for installation costs, and up to about 90% of the cost of a standalone unit. We have applications and guidelines that are available currently on the district's website. And we've been in communication with all the school districts that have schools within the 617 boundary. And kind of where we are right now and what we've heard back from school districts is a couple things. One, that the schools that are in the 617 community are already operating with the highest level filters that their systems can tolerate. So while we might have thought there was some opportunity to go from a MERV 8 or a 9 to a 10 or an 11, their current systems really just can't handle that upgrade. They're already kind of at the best that their systems can do. Second thing is that the standalone units might not be a viable option because of the number that are needed for each classroom, maybe the effectiveness, as a long-term solution for classes. And then the third kind of component of this that we've heard back from school districts is that there's significant funding that's available for school districts to upgrade their facilities from a lot of the COVID-related legislation and funding that's out there, and that can include the HVAC systems. So kind of a variety of factors. There's a lot going on there, a lot of challenges that we've experienced in trying to implement this measure so far. And then at the last community steering committee meeting, there was some concerns that were expressed about the program. And in particular, I think those concerns were related to the standalone units and the funding that we have available for that. So as part of that discussion, Keith Lowen from Washington Unified set up a meeting with CARB and some researchers at UC Davis and Air District staff to talk about standalone units and air filtration and some of the things to consider when talking about air filtration in schools. A couple of the things that were discussed as part of that particular meeting were, number one, the need for very thorough assessments of HVAC systems by knowledgeable and trained professionals. So one of the pitfalls that I think some school districts might have experienced outside of California or maybe other areas of California is just kind of relying on industry folks to sell them on units that really may not be all that effective for that application. So one of the things that was stressed was really the need to do thorough assessments and understand limitations, and then use portable or standalone units as sort of a temporary supplement for air filtration needs in classrooms. There was also a recommendation that CARB and the district provide assistance to schools in identifying units that are efficient, that are cost effective, and that have the appropriate noise levels to operate in classrooms. And then they also provided some information that we could pass along to schools that might be effective in, if they are considering standalone units. Now, at this point in our discussions, the school districts that we've talked to really haven't expressed, a desire or interest in implementing standalone units as sort of a temporary option. They're kind of looking at more permanent and long-term solutions as the best use of their funds. I think we've got at least sort of one representative from Fresno Unified here today. I want to turn it over to him in just a minute, but I wanted to kind of pause there. I know that's a very kind of quick summary of where we might be at today, but based on that information that I just provided, wanted to see if there's any kind of questions before we kind of turn some stuff over to the school districts. I see Ivanka, I see Nayamin with her hand raised there.
Yeah, well, Ivanka too.
And Ivanka, both of them. I actually got it right by accident.
Yeah,
But Nayamin, why don't you go first and then we'll go to Ivanka.
Sure. Well, I unfortunately wasn't able to join that meeting that Keith convened. So I was wondering if you can give a little bit more updates of what was the did we learn from especially from the UC Davis team. What are the best options for the different schools that have very different systems?
Well, I think the main thing that was discussed is ensuring that thorough assessments are done to understand what might be an option or what might be available with any existing systems, understand what would be necessary with any supplemental systems or standalone units, understanding the clean air delivery rates that are associated with those portable units, how effective they may or may not be, just kind of a number of issues there. But in terms of like recommending a specific product or anything like that, they have kind of a list of products that they had put together. We can share that. I mean, options for what somebody may want to consider. We could share that with the committee and certainly with the school districts. But it was kind of a technical discussion about how to address the issue and what school districts may want to consider when looking at their HVAC needs.
Are you gonna change in any way the assessment that you have been doing with school districts? Just getting to know what were their current needs.
So I think we can touch on that as part of the school district kind of updates. I think as part of their processes, they're assessing their systems within the framework of the guidelines for the program. HVAC assessments are an eligible cost. So if a school district was going through with a project under our program, we would be able to cover those costs, provided that they're kind of moving forward with the project. So in that respect, Naimeen, to answer your question, I don't think there's any changes that are necessary under the current program guidelines to support those costs. And I think that we could move forward. Maybe, Keith is here and I appreciate his involvement in that meeting and setting it up. Keith, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add kind of relative to that meeting we had with UC Davis, and then we can go to Ivanka.
There we go. The only thing I want to add is it also, to me, showed that there's a lot of information that school districts need that they don't know about. There are a few, the very large ones, but especially the medium and small ones, they don't have time to learn all of this. So that's all I'd add.
Cool. Thank you, Keith. Ivanka?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a two-part question is, when do we get back to the steering committee to discuss amending the budget of what we originally said we wanted to allow, especially knowing that the steering committee decided they did not want that large amount of funding to go to a train engine. So knowing that there's a bigger fund in comparison to what, I don't know if in that meeting, Keith, they discussed like what it would take or whether, depending on the school size, to revamp an HVAC system, right? Like even by increasing the amount of money that we're pulling from another measure that's not moving forward, how much of a dent could that even possibly help in the air systems, the air filtration systems? And then also the second part of this is it even possible as part of writing when the air district has to submit to the CARB what their measure entails for air filtration, do we know off the bat that air filtration systems, HVAC systems, is or is not allowed according to CARB standards? Under CARB's guidelines, do we know if that would just be an absolute no?
So I think that's a really good question, Ivanka. I think what so we don't, in this particular measure, we don't need to submit a project plan to CARB since it's an existing sort of pre-approved program within CARB's guidelines. And we've asked CARB for some feedback. It would appear that under the guidelines, if the district and the committee wanted to pay for a new HVAC system, that's something that could be allowed under the existing guidelines within kind of the framework of the installation costs that are covered under the program. I think, what I want to do next is kind of turn it over to Fresno Unified and Washington Unified to talk about some of the things that they have planned with the COVID money that they're getting, because my understanding in those discussions is that they're going to be doing a lot of that existing work kind of through that funding source. So we can maybe talk a little bit more about that after the school districts provide their update. In terms of your question about moving money around, I'm not sure. I know that was discussed in a recent steering committee meeting. I'm not sure kind of where we landed with that discussion. There certainly is money from other measures to move around. I'm not sure, given the potential projects that you did, depending on what we're looking at with this measure, that this would be the best one at this point to move money into. But I think certainly that can be an ongoing discussion, and maybe if Ryan has any kind of input on that particular question, want to jump into that, feel free, Ryan.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. Yeah, we definitely are open to the concept of moving money, listening to the CSC and where it makes sense to do it. It seems like there's an update from Fresno Unified, and depending on what they're doing, would definitely help inform whether there is an opportunity or a need, which is more. It's going to be good to hear from Fresno Unified directly, and I know we have Keith here from Washington Union as well. So that being said, I mean, when we've had discussions about shifting and transferring funds, it's typically been in relation. We already like in the scenarios where we know that the funding is going to be insufficient, and so definitely want to take a look at that and put it towards those things. What we want to avoid would be to shift funding without really knowing whether or not it's needed. Putting it to a measure and then looking to later on, then looking to move it again from measure to measure. So we've kind of always said, like, we have that funding that Ivanka, that you talked about, that the locomotive, the $5+ million that would have gone to that. So when we do have the need to move that funding, that funding is there. As we talked about a few months ago, that the funding that we put towards the Fresno incentive measures, that's what that is for. It's to fund measures for the South Central Fresno CERT. So I think that was a long-winded answer, and I don't know if I answered it completely, but.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. I hope that answered Ivanka's question. What I'd like to do now, Mitch Gash, hopefully I got your name right, Mitch, from Fresno Unified is here today. He has a hard stop at 3:45, so wanted to kind of turn it over to him to kind of provide an update on some of Fresno Unified's plans. And then we can ask any questions there, and then kind of maybe get an update from Keith on Washington Unified's plans after Mitch has had a chance to answer any questions you might have. So Mitch, thanks for your participation today. We really appreciate it and look forward to hearing your update this afternoon.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mitch Gash. I'm a maintenance manager with Fresno Unified. I oversee the capital improvement and deferred maintenance programs in the district, and the project managers that work with me. One of them is about hip deep in our HVAC upgrade process throughout the district. And obviously, when a bunch of COVID-related funding became available, we set out with our team from maintenance to sort of quickly determine which ones we could throw money at right away. We found some of the best things that we could do in order to, in order to increase the indoor air quality was to, we purchased a bunch of buffer tanks to increase the capacity of our chillers that would then allow us to crank up the air on some of those units. What we did find in the process, I don't know that we were surprised at all by it, was that a lot of our aging systems, including unit ventilators, air handlers, the like, were not capable of the increase in airflow on their own. And so we had to change a bunch of motors out in some of the older equipment. Some of them we were able to do so, get to either MERV 11 or MERV 13, and it was ultimately our goal to go all the way to MERV 13. What we also did was we identified as quickly as possible, and based on just a rudimentary assessment from our maintenance team again, was determine which of our existing air handler units motor replacements would be required. And so we set about purchasing that equipment and starting on a path to getting those replaced as well. For the long term, what we've done, we actually worked out, it's going to work out pretty well for us. We've actually engaged a couple of project management firms to assist with the program because it's work on top of work we already have and our project managers already have. We set aside, or there is some funding immediately available, that we were able to begin assessments and actually develop scopes of work on roughly 16 separate sites, where we would include a complete change out of classroom unit ventilators and any package units that serve as classroom or instructional areas. And we're focused mainly on that at this point. Excuse me, we want to get the classrooms done first. The majority of our stuff is either small plant or large plant chilled water systems, hydronic pipe systems, and then unit ventilators controlling those classrooms. Most of our package units, some of the schools do have package units throughout, but most of our package units are mainly on the administration and office and library portions of the campus. So as we continue through this with these guys, and we've also brought on board a couple of mechanical engineering firms to begin our assessments, not only for programs like this one, but through, there's AB 841, and then a couple other COVID-related funding availabilities that we're looking at. We're going to go through and do the assessment so we can determine in our minds, and our justification going to our board is worst to first. We do have a lot of systems that are still utilizing even pneumatic controls, believe it or not, in this day and age. So we're also looking at, in that assessment, taking a look at what we're doing control-wise, changing out controls to determine how best we can provide the indoor air quality that I think everyone's going to be expecting over the next several years. I made a couple of notes, and I apologize that I was notified of this meeting a little bit late, so I don't know that I'm properly prepared or not, but hopefully I can answer any questions you guys have. And if not, I can get the information to answer to the best of my abilities. But again, the biggest things that we're looking at are increasing the size of the system so they can, so we can incorporate the larger filtration and the increased filtration. And that goes from anything from just some of the older units, we were allowed to crank up the RPMs on the old motors, and they easily handled it, which we were kind of surprised about, to be honest with you, without going past any loads. We did a couple of tests at a couple different sites where we took the existing unit ventilators, which were fairly recently replaced. They're about halfway through their life cycle, and we just turned them up to see what they do load wise and how they would react. And they all did really well. Didn't go past any increased loads as far as electrical was concerned. And we were able to then insert the MERV 13 filtration in those units. But we're going to continue to do that, continue with the assessments, continue to replace chillers and systems, and the control system, the EMS systems as well. So don't know if that's all the information you guys were expecting, but if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try and answer them.
Any questions?
Yeah, I just,
Committee from it?
thank you, Mitch.
Mhm.
I think for us, for me, your maintenance HVAC language is kind of like new to layman's ears.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about the actual parts of these systems, and in my terms, I'm using just like a whole revamp, but are you stating that by systematically going through the worst parts first could actually be the upgrade of a whole system without replacing the whole system?
Yes, depending upon the age of the system
Yeah.
and the age of the units and components itself, we were able to go through on some of the sites and just increase the motor speeds on some of the units. And by increasing the motor speeds, we didn't surpass the recommendations of the electrical consumption or the amperage, basically. So we were still able to stay within the recommended amperage on those units. And so that allowed us then, in order to go to MERV 13 filtration and still maintain the airflows required, we had to make them turn faster. So once we did, found out they'd still work within the limitations provided by the manufacturer without affecting the electrical components. And we just changed, we cranked up the motors and changed the filters where we could. And those were kind of, you know, we often refer to the low hanging fruit. And that was sort of the low hanging fruit for some of those systems. And now we're at a point where I think we're about to the end of the filtration change outs and the motor increases, the speed increases, and now we're starting to look more along the lines of full unit change outs and equipment change outs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I know it probably goes a little, it probably goes a little away from the intent in providing increased filtration, but obviously some of the things that we found in increasing indoor air quality was the increase in air exchanges in the space itself. And I know that doesn't have a lot to do with filtration, but that actually allowed us in some cases to bring the indoor air quality within the levels that were required. Some of the areas, obviously, you can't do that. And filtration is going to be the only means in order to meet that requirement, in order to make the indoor air quality better. But where we could, we also increase the capacity of the outdoor air intakes on the units that provided a better indoor air quality with the testing that we did. I know that goes away from the filtration, which is the discussion more of this panel, but.
Any other questions for Mitch while we have him here? Okay, seeing none. Mitch, thank you very much for your update. We really appreciate it. Keith, do you want to take a few minutes and kind of talk about what your school district is doing on these efforts?
Sure. We have engineers looking at it. They've already done a preliminary assessment. About approximately 92% of our air conditioners are 30 years or older. So we made the decision that we are going to replace about 75% of our air conditioners. The difference between that 92 and that 75 is there are some buildings that we are going to get rid of in the next up to 5 years. So we're not going to replace the HVAC system, even though it would help. And we are looking primarily at the filtration. And that's right now in some of our classrooms, the air levels do reach unhealthy. And so we want to take care of that first and foremost above anything else. And the feds and the state are providing serious money towards this. First time that I can think of that either the federal government or the state government, and in this case both, have stepped up and they're providing a lot of money to school districts to provide to provide these air filtration devices. Any questions?
Thanks for the update, Keith. We really appreciate it. I know you mentioned some of that in previous meetings, but thank you for the update, and great to hear that you have some resources available to make those upgrades. Any other questions for our school district representatives that are here? Any questions about the program? I will add that we've also reached out to Central Unified has 4 schools within the boundaries. We've reached out to them. They're reviewing program materials and anticipate that we'll hear back from them soon with any questions that they might have. Same with kind of Fowler Unified and Orange Center schools and Raisin City Elementary, where they have a small number of schools in the district, or excuse me, in the 617 community. But we're continuing to engage with them and to see if there's any opportunities, for participation in the program. We'll continue to have those conversations with those school districts, and can continue to provide some updates along the way. At this point, we don't have anything super specific about what their plans are, but we're reaching out. We're having conversations with their facilities and maintenance folks, similar to the conversations we've had with Fresno Unified and with Keith along the way as well.
I have a question. Do you have a sense, have you been asking, based on your conversations with this school district, what is the estimated number of applications that, or even funding required that would be coming in? Just so that we know, going back to Ryan's point about the budget, we need to have an idea, right? Like, okay, these school districts are anticipating applying for this much and that much and that much, and that way we can see, do we need more money there?
No, at this point, we have not heard back anything specific about what they would potentially be applying for. This particular measure, has $1.5 million that was allocated to it in the SERP. At this point, I can't imagine that we would exceed that. I think initially, if we thought there was opportunities with Fresno Unified, they obviously have the most schools within the district, in the 617 community. And if those are being upgraded along the way, there's not a lot of other options for, or the number of schools that are out there is greatly decreased. So I think, really, I think we're going to try and work through the summer on kind of working with the other school districts to see what projects that they have. They've been very busy, is an understatement, I think, through the end of the school year. And I'm hoping that we can continue over the summer to engage in more conversations to identify any potential projects that the other schools may have that are out there, and hopefully be able to answer that specific question along the way, Naimeen.
I just had a comment, and I guess this is around what the Air District, what this measure can supplement in the terms of from the time we first created this measure until now through COVID. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, but isn't it almost like 500 million that Fresno Unified School District alone is getting when it comes to combination of the federal and state dollars? And so, that kind of funding, it would be helpful, like Naimeen had stated, as the districts move through how they're allocating their money, for us to be able to know that to some level, so that we can say, well, where can our little bit that we have help support the worst first in the things that maybe the school district's funds for some reason can't cover, which with those kind of funding, with that type of funding, you would hope that under these weird situation of COVID, that it's a blessing in disguise to finally do what school districts have needed for such a long time. So just that comment is really to that needing that open communication to continue with the Air District. I know as the steering committee in past calls had felt like there wasn't enough communication between the Air District and the school districts. And so if we can keep that open and really transparent on what the bottom line will actually be going towards by the school's funds, so it will help us be able to prioritize, even if it's, you know, nowhere near that amount, it would help us prioritize for this measure.
Mitch, are you able to talk about the sort of overall budget that Fresno Unified might have for these type of improvements?
Yeah, I saw some public records information that indicated it was somewhere just south of 700 million overall that Fresno Unified would have available to it. Unfortunately, most of that funding has a 3-year clock on it, and I don't think there's even any way a district of our size could throw away that much money in a 3-year period. So we're trying to, via our assessments, determine exactly what we can get to and when. And so I think there is some opportunity there to partner with the Air Board as far as some of the worst district sites and in some of the areas that you're speaking of, in order to help us and support us in providing that filtration in those. We're also looking at those, though, if they're going to be worst first to you guys, they're going to be worst first to us as well. We'll probably have already intended on doing some work in some form or another at those sites. So I kind of listening to what's going on, and I think there are definitely some opportunities there, and we would definitely greatly appreciate the help. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that I should probably say that I don't know that we're going to be able to spend the money we're getting now in the amount of time we've been given. So we're going to try like heck, but because it's sort of a one-time funding that's going to go away forever afterward. But as we increase some of these systems and we understand a little bit better exactly what needs to take place, I think that's probably an opportunity for us to talk to you guys and how best maybe to supplement the program that we're implementing.
Is that also an opportunity, you guys, when I'm thinking about city budgets and the city's funding that was received from our CARES and then our American Rescue Plan dollars too, and that timeline of when to spend? One of the things that came out of it is if you can get the money out the door, even if the construction isn't done, or even if the project isn't done. So this could be a very good opportunity if the timeline is getting the money out the door. How can the Air District be the one to be ready to receive it, to continue the air filtration or something, just so, like you're saying, if there's a true fear that you can't spend that much money in that amount of time, then what the city had to look carefully at was how do you get the money out the door to stamp approval that it's secured and it's technically spent, even though it hasn't been constructed or broken ground yet. Right. So that could be an opportunity. Like, I agree with you, Mitch, that what kind of opportunity could be seen there between the district, the Air District and the school district.
Right. And we're looking into that as well. And we've asked through some of the state programs and for some clarification as far as encumbrance of the funds and whether or not it's accounted for and how it can, depending upon what level they want as far as information is concerned, if written scopes and prepared estimates are enough, or if in fact we have to have it out to bid with a true estimate, or it has to be bid and awaiting funding. So we're trying to roll through that as quickly as possible, obviously, so we don't lose any opportunity for the funds, but at the same time we're rolling forward as quickly as we can and gaining information wherever and whenever possible.
Mitch, what's the time frame for the assessments being completed, and then would that assessments report go back to your board for approval of moving forward? How does that process work?
We would most likely, once we get the assessments done, we would develop scope of work based on those assessments, and we determine sites. We look at worst first. We determine sites, develop scope, and some sites may require entire change out. Some may just require certain portions of it be changed out and others be upgraded. Then we would typically only go to the board once we're ready for bidding of those and for award. They'd be made aware of what's going on, but they wouldn't necessarily have to approve the process or which sites happen first. We provide them with the assessment just as not as a courtesy, but just more as informational. And then as we actually bid those projects, that's whenever they'd see what we're really doing.
Okay, so each kind of project based on the assessment goes out individually?
Yeah, we recently did the same thing with we did a district-wide paving assessments, 105 sites, and so we're doing 30 sites this summer. And so it would be something similar to that. It was based on most need and what exactly then was needed at those sites. We do the same thing on the AC. And then we put out as much as we felt the market could bear and as much as we could manage at the time.
Gotcha. When did you expect to kind of start the bidding process on any of these projects?
We're looking at our assessment period is anywhere from 8 to 10 months. And then we'll develop scopes probably for another 3 to 4. We'll determine which ones need to go to DSA for approval and be submitted for those. And we'll probably start bidding the others very quickly after that. We're hoping that we can get through on the ones that won't require DSA review and approval, that we'll probably bid those out in early 2022. And we'll start some of those change outs depending upon logistics and when we can actually do the physical work. Probably in early 2022 is when we'll start with the bidding process and potentially awarding. We're usually about 60 days out from bid to award. We can get started as quickly as we can get equipment after that. Unfortunately, a lot of our work has to happen during the summer, and so we pile a lot up in that short period of time. But in this case, with the monies we're getting on these others, we've looked at a bunch of different ways, and we're relying kind of on the contractors and the project management firms that we've hired to let us know logistically how best to go about it and potentially get it going faster. So we're looking at second shift work, potentially even later in the night, and in some cases weekend and after hours only stuff. So
I think we've just got a few more minutes with Mitch today. Any additional questions for him or thoughts? All right, hearing none. Again, we appreciate Mitch's participation. Originally, I think another member of the Fresno Unified team was going to be here, and Mitch kind of was a substitute. So we really appreciate your time today, Mitch, and the information that you've provided. I think there's a lot of ongoing communication that we anticipate with Fresno Unified, and the more information that we can share with the committee about what's going on, I think will be very helpful. So yep, we definitely appreciate it.
Yep, appreciate you guys having me. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks, Mitch. So just to kind of take a pulse of the subcommittee, any thoughts based on the conversations today about next steps, about additional conversations with the larger committee? Just kind of want to get your feedback based on the information that we've heard today. All right. Keith, any additional thoughts on your side of things in terms of kind of the program or any of the related issues that were discussed from the previous meeting? Any thoughts before we wrap up the meeting?
No, excuse me. No, the only thing I'd say is schools right now, their biggest problem is getting the information on what they should do and how they should do it. And right now, most schools are relying on salespeople, which, depending on the industry, the salespeople are sometimes don't quite explain everything. I don't want to say lying, even though that's what I mean. But a lot of districts have found that once they get things in place, that the information that the salespeople gave them wasn't correct. So any information that you can help, be it CARB, be it Valley Air, that can help the school districts, that would be appreciated.
Oh, that sounds good, Keith. And in our conversations with the school districts, we want to provide as much information as possible to help them make informed decisions. The last thing we want is any, inefficient spending of the program dollars that we have, and want it to go to the right places, which, at the end of the day is to help improve the air quality in schools for our students. So that's the most important thing. And that's what we definitely wanted to achieve with the measure. I think, even if the money's not coming from 617, it's coming to the school districts in a variety of fashions. And it sounds like across the board with the school districts that we've talked to, that they're making some significant improvements and investments in the air filtration and ventilation within their schools. So I think that's a big win for everybody, for sure.
And this is Todd, just to add on to that, I think is, one critical step that we could do as a subcommittee and also as a larger steering committee is to continue to work with the school districts as feasible to sort of prioritize, the schools within the community boundaries when they're making their decisions in terms of, which schools to upgrade first, continually working with them to get them information on the schools within the boundaries, and if all the other criteria line up with their existing plans, all things being equal, for us to continue to work with the school districts to get those priorities for those schools, within the community boundaries. So I think that'll be important as we move forward, with all the school districts that we've been interfacing with, to the extent that we can.
In terms of any action items or reports back to the larger committee at our next meeting, any thoughts on any next steps from any of the subcommittee members or information that you'd like to see returned to the full committee based on this meeting? I think in general we'll provide a summary of the discussion and obviously open it up for any questions at that time. So feel free to send me any thoughts or provide any thoughts during our next discussion on this with the full committee. Okay. All right. Well, last call. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up our discussion today. I do appreciate everybody's time and feedback and questions that they had, and all the input that you provided. So hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Monday afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Brian?
Bye. Thank you.